All right, so in this video, I want to try to answer the question, how long does marijuana THC stay in your system and can be detected on a urinalysis in different cases, different body types, different frequency of use, etc. So I've done a number of different videos on this channel on how long different drugs stay in your system, and I've done one specifically on marijuana. But the issue is that marijuana THC is a special case. It is a fat-soluble substance, so when you ingest it, it can be absorbed by body fat and then re-released over time. And this causes the testing times to vary widely. So I'm constantly getting questions in the comment sections of my other videos along the lines of, I'm 5'10", 220 pounds, and I occasionally use, will I be able to test negative in 2 weeks? So in this video, I hope to answer a lot of those comments, and you might be actually watching this video after leaving one of those comments, because from now on, I'm going to direct all of those questions back to this video. So I've got to be very clear, this is about the urinalysis. That's where the big variations in the detection window come in, is in the urinalysis. Again, I've done a previous video on marijuana detection times that included saliva, blood, hair samples. If the above example person asked me the same question as it relates to a hair sample, the answer would be 0% chance after 2 weeks. So the testing times that I quoted in that video, and I will leave a link to that video, are accurate for blood, for saliva, and for hair. So check out that video if you're interested in anything other than the urinalysis. All right, so just a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Matthew Nuesse of EasyDOTphysicals.com, and I've been running a medical testing center for about a decade. The purpose of this channel is to help people with their pre-employment medicals, including drug testing. So please stay subscribed to this channel, because whenever updates come down from the FMCSA or the federal government, I make update videos. I don't want people going in to take their medicals and have any surprises. And also, if you are interested in real drug testing reform, especially when it comes to THC marijuana, please just take a second and click the like button down below. That helps the YouTube algorithm show this to more people so that they become informed. And if you want to help support the channel, as always, check out my spring shop down below. So in this video, I'm going to give you my best estimate for how long marijuana THC will stay in your system and can be detected on a urinalysis. So please be aware, these are my best estimates, and there's absolutely no way for me to be able to give you an exact time where you're going to test negative. So this video is for informational purposes only. As always, the best way to know if you are going to pass your drug test is to home test several times leading up to that test. So I'll leave my preferred home drug test, a link to it, in the description box below. Now, I know this video is going to get pretty long, and in the future I will probably break this video up into several different videos, and I'm going to leave chapters so that you can skip ahead, but I would highly recommend not skipping ahead until I explain how we are going to differentiate between the different groups. So first, let's talk about the extreme ends of the detection times. And what I mean by detection time is how long you will need to abstain until you will test negative. So here's a chart directly from the federal government, and for THC marijuana, as you can see, the detection time varies from 3 days, as little as 3 days, all the way up to 67 days. And there have actually been reports of people testing for longer than that, but those are really outlier cases. So for this exercise, we are going to use the 1 month standard that I typically quote, that is the general rule for how long someone will test positive for THC marijuana after stopping use. And we're going to look at different individual groups, and we're going to estimate, will they test clean in less than a month or more than a month? So how long marijuana THC is going to stay in your system is going to depend on a couple of different factors. Number one is how heavy, how frequently you use. And number two is your body fat percentage, and to a degree, your activity level. So in this video, we're going to break different individuals up based on their activity level, their weight, and how heavy of a user there are. So let's first define the users. So first, we will call light users those who use every other week or up to twice per month. Moderate users will be anyone that use more than 2 times per month, all the way up to 2 times per week. And heavy users will use 3 times per week up to every day. So users will further be defined as either overweight and inactive, meaning they don't get much exercise, they don't have the healthiest diet. And by overweight, I do mean having a high body fat percentage. So you may want to use a body fat percentage scale or some kind of online calculator to make this determination. And I might leave one of those again down in the description box below. Group number 2 will be overweight but active. So you exercise and you're trying to eat healthy, but you are still overweight. And again, regular sustained exercise should help with the metabolism process and help clear you of THC quicker, but that's regular exercise. I highly recommend against starting an exercise program with the intent to detox quicker. I've done a full video on this. I will leave a link to that video above. Group number 3 is your normal weight, but you're inactive. Group 4 is normal weight, but you have the advantage of exercise. And group number 5 is that you're fit and you have a high activity level. So now we have to talk some science, and I am basing this off a couple different research articles. I will again leave links to those in the description box below if you want to check those out. But first things first is that when you initially ingest marijuana, when you smoke a joint or use about that much marijuana, have that much THC enter your system, immediately right after use, the metabolites in your urine are going to raise up to 180 nanograms per milliliter. So this is important because most of the tests have a cutoff at 50 nanograms per milliliter. So 180 is well above that, so immediately after use you are going to test positive for marijuana on a urinalysis. Now I think everybody understands that. What we want to know is how long until you can test negative. So to do that, we have to understand the concept of half-life. So half-life basically is the amount of time that it takes for the concentration to be cut in half. So to go from 180 down to 90, what is that time frame? And that varies depending on how heavy of a user you are. All the way from 1.5 days in a light user, 4 days in a moderate user, up to 7 days in a heavy user. So if we do a real quick calculation, and I'll use the light user as an example, if they start off at 180 nanograms per milliliter and we cut that in half to get to 90 nanograms per milliliter, that's going to take 1.5 days, but that is still well above the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. So we have to divide that in half again to get to 45 nanograms per milliliter under that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. That takes an additional 1.5 days, so a total of 3 days. But again, in a heavy user, that's going to take all the way up to 14 days. So an 11-day difference just to clear that initial dose. So we're going to use this data to make the estimations. But it is important to note that if you are an extremely heavy user, let's say that at every sitting you're smoking 3 joints instead of 1 joint, you're going to probably need to adjust the times that I quote up by about 25%. So it's going to be up to you to determine which category you fit into. And there's 15 of them. Let's go through them. So first off is the light user that's overweight and inactive. Then we have a light user that's overweight and active, a light user that's normal weight and inactive, the light user that's normal weight but exercises, and the light user that's fit and has regular exercise. And then we move on to the moderate users. We have a moderate user that's overweight and inactive, a moderate user that's overweight but exercises, the moderate user that is in normal weight but inactive, moderate user of normal weight that exercises, and a moderate user that's fit. And then the heavy users are going to be broken up into a heavy user that's overweight and inactive, a heavy user that's overweight but exercises, a heavy user that's normal weight and inactive, a heavy user that's normal weight but exercises, and a heavy user that's fit and exercises often. So now I will go through each of those categories individually and give you my estimate for how long they will test positive for THC marijuana. Do you know which category you fit into? Once you do, feel free to skip ahead to that section. All right, first up, the light user category, the light user that is overweight and inactive. So Bob smokes every other weekend. He has a fairly sedentary job and lifestyle, and he's 5'10", 270 pounds. So if Bob is only using occasionally, the THC should be able to metabolize relatively quickly to get under the 50 nanogram per milliliter level. Again, remember the half-life calculation. It should take about 3 days. Give it 4 to be safe. But again, THC can be stored in body fat tissue and then re-released later. And when you have a significant amount of body fat tissue, you can release potentially enough to then again tip you back over that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff later in time. So for Bob, I would estimate that he would test positive for just about a month after discontinuing use. So next up is a light user that's overweight but exercises. So Rachel smokes only on special occasions. She enjoys working out and is 5'2", 195 pounds. So again, because she's a light user, it's going to take about 3 days for her to clear that initial dose of THC. The body fat that she does have is going to store THC and then re-release it later, again, potentially in concentrations that would tip her over that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. But she does have the advantage of exercising, which can regularly break down body fat, releasing THC into your system a little quicker and allowing it to be metabolized a little quicker. So in Rachel's case, I think that she would test negative in just under a month. So next up is the light user that's a normal weight but inactive. So Darren smokes 1 to 2 times per month when he gets together with his friends. He doesn't get much activity and he's 6 foot and 185 pounds. So again, being a light user means that he should be able to clear that initial dose of THC in about 3 days. Now we still need to factor in the fact that his body fat is going to store THC and release it later, but there is a less of a chance that that concentration will tip him back over the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff in his urine. So in Darren's case, I would estimate that he would test negative in just under a month. All right, and next up is the light user with a normal body weight that has the advantage of exercise. So Saul smokes every other weekend when he's off from work. He has a mostly sedentary job, but he enjoys going to the gym after work. He's 5'5" and 155 pounds. So that initial dose of THC that he ingests should be under that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff in his urine in about 3 days. We still do have to factor in the fact that body fat is going to store and then re-release THC at a later time into his bloodstream, but there's less of a chance for that tipping him back over the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. He does have the advantage of exercising, which is going to again break down body fat a little quicker, allowing THC to be released into his bloodstream and then metabolized a little bit quicker. So I would estimate that Saul could test negative in as little as 3 weeks. And then finally in the light user category, we have the light user that's fit and exercises regularly. So Christine smokes a couple times per month to help deal with stress. She's very active and participates in triathlon competitions. She's 5'4" and 125 pounds. So using the half-life calculation, this user should be clear of that initial dose under the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff in her urinalysis in about 3 days. And this user has every advantage to test clean in the shortest period of time. They have the lowest half-life. They have very little body fat, so there's very little chance that they can re-release THC in a concentration that's going to tick them back over the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff at a later date. And they moderate exercise, which again should break down body fat a little quicker, allowing THC to be metabolized a little quicker. So this is going to be the shortest testing window, but I would still conservatively estimate that Christine could test positive for 1 to 2 weeks. So moving on to the moderate users, and first up we have the moderate user that's overweight and inactive. So Jordan smokes on the weekends only. He has struggled with weight issues his whole life and isn't a big fan of exercise. He's 5'8" and 220 pounds. So this type of user will not metabolize marijuana as quickly. Remember that moderate users have a THC half-life of about 4 days as opposed to the 1.5 days for light users. So if we do the half-life calculation real quick, 180 nanograms per milliliter, that initial dose, that initial concentration of metabolites in your urine, we divide that in half to get to 90 nanograms per milliliter. That now takes 4 days. You divide 90 in half again to get to 45 nanograms per milliliter, under that 50 nanogram milliliter cutoff, but that takes an additional 4 days. So 8 days total as opposed to 3 days. And remember that this user having a significant amount of body fat, they can also store THC and then re-release it later in time for it to be metabolized, possibly ticking that urine concentration of metabolites back over the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. So in this user, I would estimate that they would test positive for just over 1 month after stopping use. And next up, the moderate user that's overweight but has the slight advantage of exercise. So Ronnie smokes 1 time per week. He's been overweight his whole adult life, but in the past 6 months, he's been exercising and trying to get healthy. He's 5'10" and 210 pounds. So because he is a moderate user, the THC that he initially ingests is going to show up in his urine for about 8 days. Remember the half-life calculation. And also we have to factor in that he is still overweight and has a high body fat percentage, meaning that he's going to store THC and then potentially re-release it at a later time in concentrations great enough to tick his urine concentration metabolites back over that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. Now he does have the slight advantage of exercising, which will mitigate this time frame slightly, but I would estimate that Ronnie is going to test clean in about a month. All right, and now we come to the moderate user that's a normal weight but is inactive. So Tom smokes about 4 times a month. He doesn't get much exercise. He's 6'2" and 190 pounds. So for this type of user, we don't need to worry as much about the long-term release of THC from fat tissue, but it still will be a factor. Remember that that initial dose of THC takes about 8 days to get the urine concentration of metabolites under the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. And body fat will still re-release THC at a later time, but potentially not in concentrations great enough to tip the urine concentration of metabolites back over the 50 nanogram per milliliter. So for Tom, I would estimate that he is testing clean about 1 month after stopping use. Next up, the moderate user that's a normal weight but exercises. So we have Gina. She only uses on Fridays when she gets off of work. She also tries to get to the gym 3 to 4 times per week. She's 5'5" and 145 pounds. So for this user, we have the advantage of exercise, which hopefully speeds up the metabolism of body fat, allowing THC to be released into the bloodstream a little quicker and then metabolized a little quicker. Again, remember that it's going to take her about 8 days to clear that initial dose of THC from her system and be under the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff in her urinalysis, but hopefully this will be a little bit quicker due to the exercise. So I would estimate that Gina can test negative in just under a month. And finally, in the moderate category is the moderate user that's fit and exercises regularly. So Stan smokes only on occasions when he feels particularly stressed, maybe 2 times per week. He's an avid cyclist. He's 5'10" and 160 pounds of lean muscle. So having a low body fat percentage is very advantageous. Again, scientifically, the THC should be under the 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff in about 8 days in a moderate user. And since he doesn't have much body fat, he doesn't have to worry as much about re-releasing THC later. Now, even the fittest individual has a certain percentage of body fat which will store and re-release THC in the coming days. But for Stan, I would estimate that he is testing clean in under 3 weeks. And now moving on to our final category, the heavy users. So first, a heavy user that is overweight and inactive. So Dwayne has a medical marijuana card and he smokes daily. He has a fairly sedentary lifestyle and he's 5'9" and 300 pounds. So this is going to be the longest testing window because we have multiple factors working against the quick metabolism of THC. Again, for heavy users, we have to look at the half-life calculation, and in this case, it's 7 days. So if we start at that 180 nanogram per milliliter concentration in urine right after use, it's going to take 7 days to get to 90 nanogram per milliliter, and then an additional 7 days to get to 45 nanograms per milliliter under that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff, so 2 weeks. But seeing as this individual also has a significant amount of body fat tissue that can store and re-release THC in the bloodstream, potentially leading to concentrations back over 50 nanograms per milliliter in a urinalysis, and they do not exercise, which again could potentially cause the fat to break down a little quicker and release THC a little quicker so that it can be metabolized a little bit quicker, they are going to have a very long testing window. So in my estimation, people like Dwayne are the types of individuals that can test positive for 2 months or longer. And next up is the heavy user that is overweight but has the slight advantage of exercise. So John smokes every Thursday through Sunday. He's been playing basketball 4 nights per week for the past 6 months. He's 6'1" and 230 pounds. So again, this user will have this slight, and I do mean slight, advantage of being active. And this will generally lead to body fat being broken down a little quicker, THC being released into the bloodstream a little bit quicker, and then metabolized a little bit quicker. The heavy user will still have the longest THC half-life at 7 days, so it's going to take that 180 nanogram per milliliter urine concentration at least 2 weeks to clear from that initial dose. And the THC will be stored in his body fat and then re-released over time, potentially in a concentration that can tick him back over that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff. Again, this is slightly mitigated by being active. So I would estimate that John would test positive for up to 2 months. Next up, the heavy user that's a normal body weight but is inactive. So Riley is a daily user. She doesn't have time in her busy schedule to work out consistently. She's 5'10" and 160 pounds. So with a smaller body fat percentage, this user will not potentially be able to store and then later re-release THC in concentrations that potentially could tick them back over that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff in their urine. They do still have the longest THC half-life at 7 days, so it will at least take 2 weeks to clear that initial dose and get that under 50 nanograms per milliliter in their urine. And a normal weight individual is still going to retain significant amount of THC and then re-release it into the bloodstream later on. So I would estimate that Riley would be able to test negative in about 6 weeks after stopping use. All right, and next up, can you guess it? It's the heavy user that's a normal weight but has the advantage of exercise. So Brian smokes daily after work. He's in construction, so he gets plenty of activity. He's 6 foot and 180 pounds. So this user is likely going to test negative in a shorter time period because of the regular physical activity, and that activity breaking down body fat a little quicker, releasing THC into the bloodstream a little quicker so it can be metabolized a little quicker. He's still got the longest half-life at 7 days, and he still will have body fat that can store and then re-release THC later. But I would estimate that Brian could test negative anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks after stopping use. And finally, we come to the heavy user that's fit and gets regular exercise. So Sarah smokes a few times per week. She's a personal trainer and she works out daily. She's 5'2" and 118 pounds. So the slim and fit user with a low body fat percentage that is also a heavy user is probably the most difficult to estimate. They have the longest THC half-life at 7 days, but they have little body fat that can store and then re-release THC in order to get their concentrations back up over that 50 nanogram per milliliter cutoff on their urinalysis. So my official estimation for Sarah is that she will be able to pass the test at the earliest 2 weeks after stopping use, potentially all the way up to a month just because of her heavy use. So as you can see, the most common time frame that I quoted was that 1 month time frame, and that's why it is used as the standard. All right, as a bonus for everyone that's stuck around this far is, again, I'm going to put a link in the description box below for a calculator that you can do online, plug in a couple of different factors, and it will estimate how long it's going to take for you to test clean. All right, I hope this was very helpful, and until next time, everybody, stay safe.